Why would a president order helicopters to rain sunflower seeds across the sky? Not bombs, not aid, but seeds, millions of them, dropped from roaring aircrafts onto the dry, cracked earth of southern and central Burkina Faso. To outsiders, it looked absurd. To many inside the country, it felt like a miracle. This wasn't just farming. It was a cry of defiance. For decades, Burkina Faso's kitchens depended on foreign oil. Literally, nearly every bottle of cooking oil came from Europe or Asia. Each meal, each fried fish, each market stall carried a hidden cost, the quiet draining of national dignity. President Ibrahim Traoré saw what others ignored. If a nation cannot fry its food without foreign permission, how free is it really? His answer was not a policy memo, but an airborne storm of sunflower seeds. Stay with us. What you're about to witness is not just agriculture. It's a revolution planted in the soil of African pride. Subscribe, because this story is one your ancestors would have dreamt to see. Why did something as ordinary as cooking oil become a symbol of national struggle? For years, Burkina Faso relied almost entirely on imported vegetable oil. From the bustling markets of Ouagadougou to the smallest village kitchens, bottles labeled in foreign languages lined the shelves. Most came from conglomerates in Europe and Asia, companies that turned a daily staple into a pipeline for profit. Every liter poured into a pan sent money out of the country. And every disruption, be it global price surges, shipping delays, or sanctions, meant turmoil in local homes. It was easy to overlook. After all, cooking oil doesn't command headlines like gold or cotton, but it touches every meal, every home. And when prices rose or supplies dwindled, the consequences were immediate. Women rationed portions, street vendors raised prices, families skipped meals. The pain was quiet but widespread. Ibrahim Traoré, a soldier turned president, saw more than an economic inconvenience. He saw a quiet colonization still unfolding, through trade, through logistics, through diet. If a nation's ability to feed itself can be held hostage, then sovereignty is not a flag. It's a farce. He vowed to change that. But how? Burkina Faso had no tradition of large-scale sunflower farming. Farmers were used to growing sorghum, millet, maize, and groundnuts. Sunflowers, though admired for their beauty, were rare and seen as ornamental. No one had ever considered them a strategic crop. No one, that is, until Traoré. Sunflowers are more than just pretty. Their seeds yield a light, healthy oil. Their stalks feed livestock. Their roots strengthen soil, reducing erosion. Their blossoms draw bees, tourists, and photographers alike. In short, they offer food, fuel, income, and pride. Still, it was a gamble. Starting small might have been the sensible approach. A few test plots, careful trials. But Traoré rejected half measures. He understood something crucial. Incrementalism would never inspire a population conditioned to expect failure. So he chose drama over caution. From a secure military compound, he issued a bold command. 150 tons of sunflower seeds would be dropped by military helicopters over the savannas of southern and central Burkina Faso. Not planted by hand, not buried in rows, but scattered from the skies like a nation declaring war, not on enemies but on dependency itself. His advisors were stunned. Was this symbolism or strategy? Agriculture is not theater, they warned. Seeds need spacing, water, and care, not spectacle. But Traoré smiled. We do not have time for timid step, he said. If we want independence, we must plant it boldly. And so the operation began. Helicopters loaded with massive canvas sacks took off from Ouagadougou's airstrip. Soldiers, not with guns but with gloves, hoisted the sacks aboard. As the rotors thundered, word spread quickly. Rumors flew. Some feared war, others speculated about famine relief. No one guessed the truth. Then across skies once filled with dust and silence came the storm. Millions of tiny black and white seeds tumbling through the air like whispers of change. Villagers ran outside. Children laughed and danced beneath the falling specks. Elders crossed themselves or whispered prayers. Farmers bent to the soil, examining what had just landed. What they found was neither threat nor gift. It was a challenge, to believe that their land could grow its own future. Over the following days, the seeds embedded themselves in every corner of the landscape. Fields, roadside ditches, abandoned plots, even rocky outcrops. Some landed on fertile soil, others didn't. But that wasn't the point. This was not just agriculture, it was storytelling. It was choreography. It was power seeded into earth by machines once built for war. And across the country, a question began to bloom in people's minds. just as real as the flowers that might follow. Could this actually work? When the first rains came, they arrived not with drama, but with quiet grace, slipping into the cracked earth, softening what had once seemed unbreakable. And then, almost without warning, the green appeared. Across central and southern Burkina Faso, the seeds began to stir. Sprouts pushed up through the soil. Stalks thickened. Leaves spread wide like arms reaching for light. Within weeks, stretches of dusty land had transformed into patches of promise. And people noticed. Photographs flooded social media. Children standing knee-deep in greenery. Elders smiling in disbelief. Farmers holding up fledgling plants like trophies. The disbelief of the first drops from the sky had given way to cautious hope. This wasn't just a stunt anymore. Something was growing, literally. But not everyone was ready to celebrate. In the capital, urban elites scoffed. University professors gave interviews dismissing the project as reckless populism. Western media ran mocking headlines, seeds from the sky. Burkina's agricultural circus turned soldiers into farmers. Diplomats whispered of misused funds, misaligned priorities. He should be fighting terrorism, they muttered, not planting flowers. International development agencies were equally skeptical. The project had bypassed their frameworks, ignored their expertise, disrupted their narratives. After all, how could something so unplanned, so theatrical, possibly work? Yet far from air-conditioned offices and polished press rooms, a different story was taking root. In the village of Boilas, an old man told a journalist, "No president ever gave us tools, but this one gave us seeds. He tells us we matter." That quote went viral. Soon, villagers across the countryside began referring to the helicopters not as instruments of war, but as machines of life. For a people long forgotten by government plans and donor spreadsheets, this wild, unorthodox gesture felt like recognition. They were being seen. They were being included. Nature, too, seemed to answer the call. The rains that followed were generous. Germination rates exceeded expectations. Agricultural workers who had braced for failure now scrambled to document success. Young sunflowers stretched taller by the day, their broad, hairy leaves soaked in sunlight. Their deep roots tapped into layers of moisture missed by shallower crops. By the second month, the savannas began to glow. Not metaphorically, but literally. Gold spread across the landscape. Hill after hill, valley after valley shimmered in yellow. The sunflowers had bloomed. And with them bloomed something even more powerful, pride. Locals began organizing guided walks through the fields, charging small fees. Young people printed postcards. Shops displayed bouquets of fresh-cut sunflowers. Cafes served sunflower honey and sunflower seed biscuits. Foreign tourists arrived, cameras in hand, drawn not just by beauty but by curiosity. What was this sunflower revolution they had heard whispers of? In Ouagadougou, those who had scoffed began to reconsider. The headlines shifted. News outlets sent crews to document the spectacle. Analysts called it a unique fusion of symbolism and pragmatism. A few even dared to ask, had Traore outsmarted everyone? The president, for his part, remained composed. "Yes," he said in a televised address, "some seeds will not grow, but those that do will feed our people, light our kitchens, and free us from dependency. If 10 million seeds fall and only half survive, that is 5 million victories." With that sentence, the tide turned. Even international critics found themselves caught off guard by his honesty. He wasn't claiming perfection. He was claiming purpose. And in that, many found a reason to believe. Still, logistical challenges remained. Some seeds had landed in unfavorable soil. Some fields lacked irrigation. Critics warned of biodiversity risks, of monoculture hazards. Western agricultural experts warned that the model couldn't be scaled. But for many citizens, those were problems for tomorrow. Today, they had something to celebrate. The helicopters had dropped more than seeds. They had dropped a signal of faith, of risk, of vision. They had rewritten the image of the sky not as a space of violence, but of blessing. And on the ground, people stood taller, not just beside their sunflowers, but inside themselves. The bloom had come, but the question lingered, would it last? The sunflowers did more than bloom. They began to ripple. In markets across Burkina Faso, a subtle but powerful shift was underway. For the first time in decades, local vendors stocked bottles of oil labeled not in French or Mandarin, but in Mooré and Dioula. The names were familiar. Huile de Faso, Soleil Pur, evoking not foreign factories but homegrown fields. And the prices? Lower. More stable? More trusted. Housewives who had once rationed drops of imported oil now cooked freely. They spoke of freshness, of flavor, of pride. "This," one woman told a reporter, "tastes like home." In rural towns, the change was even more profound. The government, moving swiftly behind the scenes, set up small-scale oil mills. Machines imported from India and China were installed in cooperatives managed by young people and women's groups. Sunflower seeds harvested from the fields of sovereignty were pressed into golden oil, bottled, and sold locally. No middlemen, no cargo ships, no waiting for permission. But the transformation didn't stop at the kitchen. The leftover seed cake, the dense, protein-rich pulp left after pressing oil, became a new treasure. Herders who had struggled for years to feed undernourished livestock now fed their animals this nutritional gold. Goats grew plumper. Cows produced more milk. Meat quality improved. For many pastoralists, this wasn't just feed, it was freedom. One herder, speaking to a traveling journalist, put it plainly, "Before we watched our animals starve. Now they thrive. We have something to trade, something to build on." With more food came more income. With more income came opportunity. Families paid school fees. Villagers pooled money to repair wells and build grain storage. A quiet prosperity was spreading, not through aid, but through agriculture. Meanwhile, in the classrooms, something unexpected was happening. Children began drawing sunflowers, not because a teacher told them to, but because it was what they saw every day, everywhere. Poems emerged, written in chalk on school blackboards, describing the flower that feeds the land. Music teachers turned folk songs into anthems of pride, celebrating the golden fields and the president who made them bloom. Art followed life. Murals sprang up on walls in Bobo-Dioulasso and Koudougou, showing helicopters not as harbingers of war, but of hope. Traore, always in his simple fatigues, was painted holding a sunflower in one hand and a watering can in the other. He was no longer just a commander-in-chief. He had become the farmer of the people. In political terms, the impact was undeniable. Opposition parties who had mocked the seed drop now struggled to be heard. Their criticisms rang hollow against the evidence in every village. The oil on every shelf, the flowers in every field. Traore's popularity soared, not just in the cities, but in the rural heartland where trust had long been scarce. And the president did not squander this momentum. In speeches, he drew connections between agriculture and dignity. Sovereignty, he declared, is not a document. It's a plate of food, a bottle of oil, a child who eats from their own land. His message resonated across generations. Elders nodded. Youth listened. Farmers cheered. But challenges loomed. Some warned of over-reliance on one crop. Others worried about sustainability, climate variability, and market saturation. NGOs and trade experts began raising concerns about long-term strategy. Still on the ground, optimism endured. This wasn't just an economic experiment. It was psychological. The people no longer waited for help from abroad. They saw in the sunflower a model of what could happen when belief met boldness. And across the nation, from market to mosque, from classroom to cattle pen, a question began to echo. If a flower can do all this, what else might we grow? At first, the world laughed. From Paris to Washington, headlines snickered at the spectacle. Burkina's flying farmers, one British tabloid mocked. Policy think tanks called it unsustainable. Aid organizations dismissed it as a populist stunt. Behind closed doors, diplomats murmured that President Traore was playing with fire, risking stability for showmanship. But something unexpected happened. The flowers kept blooming, and with each petal, ridicule gave way to reconsideration. Media outlets that had once sneered sent reporters back to the fields. Documentaries were commissioned. Analysts shifted their tone from mocking to marveling. The New York Times called it a rare African initiative that sidestepped Western frameworks and worked. German broadcasters dubbed it agricultural theater with real results. The shift unnerved traditional power brokers. In Brussels, EU trade officials raised quiet concerns about a growing competitor in the vegetable oil market. In Washington, USAID analysts scrambled to understand how a low-budget, high-visibility initiative had outpaced their million-dollar food security programs. The IMF released a paper cautioning against over-romanticizing unstructured agricultural movements. But others were inspired. From Nairobi to Niamey, African leaders took notice. Ethiopia launched its own Tree for Sovereignty program. Ghana considered investing in local oilseed cooperatives. In Nigeria, student unions debated whether sunflowers could be used to halt desertification in the north. A new term began circulating across development forums: sovereignty crops. The idea that agricultural planning could be not only about food, but about identity, resistance, and reclamation. For the West, this was complicated. Development agencies sought meetings with the Burkina Faso government, offering technical assistance, grants, partnerships. Traore, always polite but firm, declined most offers. "We do not need experts to tell us how to grow flowers," he quipped during a regional summit. The audience laughed. Foreign delegates did not. His statement was more than wit. It was a challenge to the centuries-old assumption that Africa must be guided, managed, or rescued. With one flower, Traoré had planted a deeper idea, that the continent could shape its own future without supervision. This did not go unnoticed. Western corporations, sensing threat, began undercutting prices in the oil market, hoping to stifle Burkina Faso's exports. Trade envoys proposed regulatory barriers. Lobbyists warned of unfair competition. Yet across West Africa, consumer sentiment shifted. Burkina Faso oil became a symbol of authenticity, of self-reliance, of dignity. What had begun as one man's risky gamble had become something far larger, a challenge to global assumptions, a message to the powerful, a whisper to the forgotten. And beyond the diplomats and deals, one truth was quietly taking root. Africa was watching, and it was beginning to believe again. The sunflowers bloomed, but Traoré knew the real work had just begun. The fields of gold were not just a climax, they were a beginning. Across Burkina Faso, the government began investing in the next phase. Infrastructure, roads to connect farms with mills, irrigation systems to prepare for unpredictable seasons, warehouses to store surplus harvests, processing plants not only for oil but for biodiesel, fertilizer, and cosmetics. The goal was not just to grow, but to own the full value chain. Traoré spoke often of vertical sovereignty, the idea that true independence means controlling not only what you grow, but how you process, package, and sell it. To that end, he proposed regional integration, a Sahelian network of sovereignty crops, linking Burkina Faso with Mali and Niger. The plan was bold: a shared export market, a sovereignty fund, joint research hubs, local currencies backed by agricultural value rather than foreign loans. It was a model meant to sidestep the old paths and the old traps. For some, it was too ambitious. For others, it was long overdue. Meanwhile, back in the villages, the focus remained on the land. Farmers experimented with rotating sunflowers alongside millet and legumes. Herders developed grazing systems using sunflower seed cake. Women's cooperatives began producing sunflower-based soaps and teas for local and tourist markets. The ripple effects were multiplying, but risks lingered. Drought could strike, pests could spread, global prices could crash, and there was a real concern that monoculture, too much focus on one crop, could invite new dependencies. Environmental groups warned that the ecological balance must be protected. Economists urged diversification. Traoré listened. In a televised address, he acknowledged the challenges but stood firm in his vision. "No seed solves all problems," he said, "but some seeds awaken nations." And awaken they had. Across the continent, a quiet wave of inspiration was building. Youth groups in Kenya studied the Burkina Faso model. Activists in Senegal planted gardens of dignity. Students in Tanzania wrote essays titled "The Power of One Seed." Burkina Faso had done something few imagined possible. It had shifted from being a cautionary tale to a case study in courage. But the deeper question remained, one not just for Traoré or his cabinet or his country. Could the rest of Africa plant its own future? And if so, what seeds would it choose? By the third year, the fields no longer shocked anyone. They had become part of the landscape, like the morning sun or the rainy season. Children grew up thinking sunflowers were normal. And in that quiet normalcy lay the revolution's greatest victory. Sovereignty was no longer a speech. It was a lived experience. Markets filled with oil pressed from local seeds. Families cooked without fear of foreign shortages. Herders sold heavier cattle. Schools taught lessons framed by fields of yellow. And when the sun rose over central Burkina Faso, it rose over a people who had turned faith into food. Traoré stood one morning on a rural platform, watching villagers gather for the annual Festival of the Sun. He saw children wearing crowns made of petals. He heard songs that praised not kings but farmers. He saw murals of helicopters transformed into planters, dropping not bombs but beginnings. He remembered the laughter, the ridicule, the mockery. He remembered the risk. And now, surrounded by the living proof of that bold gamble, he spoke with a quiet conviction. "We planted seeds of sovereignty," he said, "and they have bloomed not just in our fields but in our hearts." Burkina Faso was no longer a land of dependence. It was a land of flowers, of courage, of choice. If this story lights a fire in your chest, do more than watch. Share this, speak this, spread this. Subscribe now. Because every seed of sovereignty begins with a voice that dares to say, Africa can do it. What about you? Do you believe Africa can choose its own crops, its own future, its own pride? If the sky were yours, what would you plant? Sunflower Revolution was never just about oil. It was about vision. It was about saying no to dependency and yes to dignity. And today, as the world watches the golden horizon of Burkina Faso sovereignty, one truth shines clearer than ever. Africa can feed itself. Africa can lead itself. And Africa can bloom.